It's 2 p.m. straight up. Welcome to the Professional Qualifications Committee meeting Friday, October 30th, 2020. And we will begin going through the agenda. Let's have a call to order by the Vice Chair. I'm sorry, a roll call by the Vice Chair.
Okay. Pascal Gutierrez.
Present.
Yang Feng here. Raymond Cheng.
Present.
Betsy Doherty.
Present.
Glenn Gall.
Present.
Brett Blackstone. Brett, you need to unmute yourself.
If you hold the space bar, you can temporarily unmute yourself.
I can come back to him. Kurt Villa.
Here.
Steve Sands.
Here.
Stephanie Silkwood.
Present.
Sunny Wood.
Present. Here.
Brett, have you figured out your unmute?
This is the moderator. I can unmute him. Brett, you've been unmuted.
Yes, I don't know how to unmute myself, but I am here.
Okay, you should have the ability, you should see a microphone to the right of your name or at the bottom of your screen.
Mr. Chair,
Pascal would be possible.
So,
Mr. Chair, we have 4 attendants.
thank you very much. So we have a quorum. Let's proceed with the meeting. Was there a question there from Kirk?
Yes, Pascal. Would it be possible to get everyone to turn their video on so we can see their faces?
For those of you that have cameras and you wish to turn on your video, please do so. Okay, we continue with procedural remarks. The committee may not discuss or act on any of the items raised during the public comment section, except to decide whether to refer to the item to the board next strategic planning session and or place the matter on the agenda for a future meeting. With regards to format, with regards to item D and E, as chair, I will be using my discretion to alternate between the two agenda items, more so in an attempt to keep the horse in front of the cart. I think there's overlapping conversations that will transpire, so I think going back and forth will allow us to do that in a very sequential and systematic way. I will remind the committee that Government Code Section 1125.7 provides the opportunity for the public to address each agenda item during discussion or consideration by the committee prior to it taking any action on said item. I will be calling on the public to provide any commentary prior to voting on any item that the committee seeks to do so. In addition to that, I will ask the committee members at this time to unmute and please let us know. Well, first of all, by a show of hands, please indicate whether you have a public member at your location or not. I'm sorry, not or not. If you have a public member at your location, please raise your hand. I don't see any hands raised, so therefore assume there are no public members at any of the committee members' locations. And we have the committee member or public registered with the moderator. I will ask the staff that's present to please introduce themselves at this time.
This is Laura Zuniga, the board's executive officer.
This is Marcus Reinhardt, the board's licensing manager.
So I would imagine that concludes our staff attendance. Just as a reminder, as we go through the meeting, we will use, as we've done in the past, the round table discussion or speaker selection process so that we'll use the committee member roster as a round table, and I will go through each of the board members requesting their opinions or ideas on whatever matter we happen to be discussing at that time. So with that, I believe we will proceed with the meeting. And as I said, I will use my discretion to alternate back and forth between the two agenda items. So I'm going to go to and call upon AIACC to make their presentation at this time. I will advise the committee that this presentation was made to the board at its September meeting and was delegated by the board members at that time to come back to the PQ for their recommendation back to the board with regards to weaving the related strategic plan objective and weaving this proposal into the strategic plan objective of amending continuing education requirements. So with that, AIACC, please take the floor, and we look forward to your presentation.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Bill Letty. I'm an architect in San Francisco and current Vice President of Climate Action for AIA California, as well as the Committee on the Environment Chair. And I think Mark Christian is also on the line, who is the AIA California Director of Government Relations. I'd like to just talk to you briefly about this initiative that we've been working on, which is a part of a larger effort that AIA California is taking toward urgent climate action. Next slide, please. So, I think the question of why mandatory continuing education and zero net carbon design, I think one of the questions that we came through before this meeting was what documented evidence requires mandatory continuing ed in this topic? And I would suggest that that we are in an unprecedented climate emergency. The effects of climate change are accelerating, as we all know, with wildfires and storms and droughts and all other manner of weather anomalies. And so, next slide, please. And ultimately, the climate emergency is really all about the carbon. It's not just about the carbon in the air, of course, that results from the wildfires that we've been experiencing, but it's the carbon emissions from buildings, which represent globally over 40% of the total global warming gases that are impacting climate change. Next, please. You can see here the range of different contributions by sector for global CO2 emissions. Of course, in the case of California, because of Title 24, we are somewhat less than this number, but I think we can all agree that we're not isolated from the rest of the globe, and in fact, we can have a big impact. Next, please. So this is where we are. This is us. Time is short. I think scientists agree that the impacts of climate change are accelerating beyond the models that have been predicted thus far, and we really only have 10 years between now and 2030 to try to radically reduce the carbon emissions of our buildings and of our environment without risking even greater, more serious climate impacts. So we need to mobilize very quickly, and the AIA California board has voted to support a range of different integrated strategies to try to do this. Next, please. But I think key to that is that every building we touch over the next 10 years has to be brought to zero emissions in a way that is both cost effective and supports decarbonization of the grid. I can't emphasize how crucial this point really is. And I think what we've seen is that we're trying to approach this in a couple different ways, as I mentioned. One of which is to address the building code. We're actively promoting electrification around the state. We're actively promoting adoption of what's called the Zero Code for California, which proposes to change the code to require all new commercial buildings to be net zero carbon by as early as possible, hopefully 2025. And a variety of other strategies to educate architects. But key to this is educating architects as a part of the licensure process. Next, please. Did you skip one? There we go. Yeah, so here we are. Part of this is really all about the public health and welfare of the public. And I know this is what you folks are really focused on, and certainly this is what Aiacc California is also focused on. So these are the elements that we're proposing to change in the near future to try to ramp up our response to decarbonization in the state. And I think part of this is to say, well, okay, this is fundamentally in the interest of the public, of the health, safety, and welfare of the public. And it is fundamentally within the influence of architects in the building industries to help affect some of these changes. Next, please. Why is California climate action critical? Well, of course, as you all know, we're the 5th largest economy in the center, in the globe, and the center for global innovation. And also, the nation of the world is watching us, how we respond to climate change. When our colleague Ed Mazzaria, the founder of Architecture 2030, talks to energy ministers in China and India and places all around the globe, the first question they ask is not what the federal government is doing about climate action, because they know that currently nothing is being done about climate action at the federal level, but they always ask, what's California doing? So I think we have a fundamental responsibility, but also a huge opportunity to be leaders in the world in terms of trying to shift to a zero carbon economy. Next, please. So how do we do this? We need to prepare the profession for a rapidly changing world. We need to protect the public's health, safety, and welfare in a time of rapidly advancing climate destabilization. We need to mobilize the architectural profession, but also every profession to pitch in on this enormous historic challenge. Next, please. Did a little research into mandatory continuing education across the nation, and actually, I was quite frankly surprised to find out that California ranks 48th out of 53 states and territories in the number of total hours required per year. So, of course, as you all well know, we currently require 5 accessibility learning units every 2 years. So it's a total of 2.5 per year, of course. But we discovered that 79% of the states in the US require 12 mandatory continuing education hours per year. So I think the question is, how can we really claim to be leaders if we're not really educating our professionals and requiring that to ramp up as quickly as possible to address some of these pressing challenges and threats to public safety, health, and welfare. Next, please. So the goals of mandatory continuing education in zero net carbon design. We want to educate all architects in California about zero net carbon design. We want to prepare all architects to protect the public's health, safety, and welfare. We want to prepare all architects to rapidly changing energy codes. We want to mobilize the profession to help lead statewide decarbonization. And we want to focus first on reducing operational carbon, but then expand to resilience, which we see as being a larger issue. But the primary threat to our existential threat to our entire global society is really carbon emissions. So we need to really radically reduce that. We want to ensure qualified instruction for all courses. And finally, the reason we're here is we want to collaborate very closely with the California Architects Board in order to do that. Next, please. Next slide, please. So what we're proposing, I think, which we feel, given the magnitude of the challenge before us, before our society, essentially, seems to be a modest beginning. Since there are already 5 learning units required for every 2 years for licensure for accessibility topics, we are proposing 5 additional learning units in zero net energy design required every 2 years for architectural licensure. Why are we proposing this? Because we're finding that in the absence of code requirements, and even in the presence of the Title 24 code requirements that exist today, there's a real lack of literacy among large portions of the profession in what it takes to make a zero carbon building and why that's important. So we feel that it's important to educate all these folks and really get them kind of bring their creativity on board to addressing this challenge as one large effort. The second point here is the AIA California wants to make all these courses available free to all California architects. This is not just for the benefit of AIA members. This is for everyone. And we have an extensive network of experts to ensure quality course providers. While we haven't, prepared a detailed course curriculum yet at this point, pending, a kind of an agreement with all of you folks that this is something we can work together on. At the same time, we do have I think quite a successful track record in providing continuing education in accessibility for the profession. Another point to make, I think, on this is that all of these learning units would also be beneficial for providing for members of the AIA to fulfill HSW, health, safety, and welfare learning units that are required for membership in the AIA. So it's a kind of a win-win for both the AIA and also for the for other architects who aren't members of the AIA. Next, please. So the benefits to the profession and the public: foundational expertise. We want to provide our California architects with a basic understanding of the profession's role in reducing carbon dioxide emissions through the built environment. We want to provide practice support, equipping our California architects with useful tools to prepare for future code cycles. We're proposing to provide free continuing education courses to qualifying to members and other architects. We want to advance our state's national leadership in climate action and rapid decarbonization. And also we feel this very, very much addresses the issue of social equity, because decarbonization creates new inner city jobs and will help protect disadvantaged populations from severe climate impacts. Next, please. So the resolution that was passed by the AIA California Board of Directors on July 23rd reads, in brief, work with the California Architects Board to promote and obtain a requirement for architects to complete an additional 5 hours of continuing education in building decarbonization zero net carbon design every 2 years as a condition of license renewal beginning in the 2023 renewal cycle. So the question for you folks is, how can we work with CAB to achieve this important goal? Next, please. I'd like to finish with this image, which is this is a quote. It's almost a poem from the National AIA Climate Action Plan that was published this past April. One site, countless challenges, a looming deadline, 7.5 billion clients. This is the ultimate design project. This is why we're here. So with that, I'd like to open it up to questions. I know there are many questions that we've seen kind of coming across the emails, and hopefully I can help address some of those. And I'll probably be asking Mark Christian to jump in for the ones that I can't. So thank you very much.
William, this is Pasquale. Thank you again for the presentation. It's very exciting to see what AI is doing. As part of our agenda, it was shared, I think 4 questions were shared with you that are part of the agenda. And I saw some of those answers in your presentation, but maybe just to focus in on the question answer of what is put in the agenda. Do you have a copy of the agenda in front of you, by the way, or near you?
I don't, but I have the questions.
Okay, great. So then perhaps you can read the questions and then maybe respond to the question so that we can get that focus on the response to the question. And after we're done with that, I think there was an additional supplemental questions that came your way. And then we can entertain that after these first 4 questions.
Right. Okay. So the first one I understand was what documented evidence requires mandatory continuing education on this topic, and I hope I've explained, and I hope you all read the newspapers and recognize that there is this climate emergency that we are now fully engaged in that we need to address. So it's been scientifically documented. It's been documented by the United Nations. It's been documented by any number of climate scientist groups. So I hope I don't have to describe that any further, but if you have any questions about that, please let me know. The next one was what actions are we prepared to take for the continuing education courses, and how will that work? I think our existing mandatory continuing education curriculum that we created, the Aiacc California has helped to create to address the accessibility requirements, is a good model for this. I'm happy to say that in California we have some of the thought leaders in zero carbon design as members of the Aiacc California, and I think we have a huge pool of resources both in our state and beyond. Of individuals who can provide qualified, educational sessions. How will AI mobilize architects? Well, I think we're trying to mobilize architects on many different fronts, and hopefully the public as well. So again, I think it's a multi-pronged approach. Try to work through public advocacy to encourage rapid electrification and renewable energy ordinances at the local level, at the state level. Try to promote. We're promoting the Zero Code for California, both in as a REACH code within CalGreen, and also hopefully eventually as an integral part of Title 24. We are also promoting the advancement of the international existing building code, which would help to encourage greater adaptive reuse of existing structures and deep energy retrofits, which is as you probably many of the architects in the group have heard know well that the most sustainable building is the one that's already built. So that's a way of using existing buildings as a way of harvesting the embodied carbon of those buildings and helping to reduce carbon. At the same time, we're ramping up our educational efforts. We've started a whole series of webinars that's been going on monthly, a series of white papers, and a variety of other materials provided to local architects to help them advocate at the local level for zero carbon policy. And then finally, this proposal that we're talking about today, we firmly believe that if we can simply educate the profession fully to embrace this as a new requirement in the design of our buildings before the codes require it, that from the point of view of climate change, we'll be ahead. From the point of view of protection of the public health and welfare, we will be ahead. And from the point of view of professional development, we will also be ahead because we will have prepared the profession for this changing landscape. And finally, I think the last question was, how would AIA describe CEU learning objectives? We haven't prepared a whole list of the learning objectives, but I think the primary learning objective is to demystify what it takes to make buildings zero net carbon on an annual basis, to provide simple tools to do that, to really help transform practice so this becomes second nature to all of us in the building industries, and becomes, instead of a rarity, rapidly becomes the norm. So are there any other follow-up questions or discussion that you'd like to?
I'm sorry, there were 3 additional questions that I believe were forwarded to you earlier in the week. Did that happen, Marcus?
Pasquale, yeah, I sent them, I think earlier today. I sent the additional questions to the members and Bill.
Was
and
it
Marcus.
to me? So it was from you, Marcus?
Yes.
Yeah, maybe you could just go ahead and ask them so I don't have to look them up. I'm sorry, I didn't.
Let's do that. Let's do that. So question number 1 was, will the AIACC have enough data to move forward with the legislative proposal?
I think what we're preparing to do here, and I actually, you know what, Mark, do you want to answer that one? Are you there?
I am, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Thank you, Bill, Pasquale. We are still, of course, developing all of the data. Or not all of our data is completely developed yet, but certainly a lot of the information that Bill included in his presentation to this committee and to the board earlier would be a part of that. And that there is a climate crisis, that there is an opportunity, we would say more than an opportunity, a necessity to make sure that the architectural profession, those who design most of the commercial buildings, have the skill set, have the knowledge necessary to not only meet any increase requirements in future building codes, but to have that knowledge regardless, to work with their clients to design and build better performing buildings. So I think that's going to be the core data point on this legislative effort. It will be another step California can take to address the climate action that is needed, the climate situation we have, which Governor Newsom has stated he wants to be one of his priorities next year. Pasquale, if you're talking, you're on mute.
I was on mute. Thank you. Do you happen to have an ETA when that data will be prepared and ready to unfold as legislative support?
Well, certainly we have to have stuff prepared and ready to go at least by April, or I should say no later than April, probably January and February, when we will be trying to solidify who will be the legislator carrying this bill in the legislature. The end of the 3rd week of February is the bill introduction deadline in the legislature, and we will probably be trying to confirm our author sometime in January, especially after we know what legislators are assigned to what policy committees within the legislature.
Thank you. As
Yes.
a completely part of the first question, is AIACC prepared to move forward with this learning program without it being a mandatory continuing education requirement?
I can answer that a little bit, and maybe Mark can jump in. We already are working to, there are many courses that can be been taken if you're a member of the AIA to continue your education in this topic. However, we feel that's not enough, and we feel that we represent AIA California represents around 11,000 architects in the state, but there are many more architects who aren't members of the AIA California, and so we feel that it's important to make this information a requirement, that it's not enough to make it optional, that making buildings reduce their carbon footprint is no longer optional. We have to do it, and we have to do it rapidly. So that's why we feel it's absolutely essential to make this mandatory and to ramp up the knowledge base within the profession as quickly as possible.
Thank you. One more question is, has the AIACC surveyed or is thinking about surveying its members to gather what their support may be on this initiative?
We have not surveyed our members. I think that, as you know, mandatory continuing education is can be controversial depending upon who you're talking to. But I don't know, Mark. Do you think that that's something that is a requirement of this process?
Well, our board of directors was, Bill, maybe you remember, I don't know if it was unanimous or near unanimous in approving this. And we did an advocacy survey of our members, which I'm trying to pull up. It did not specifically address continuing education, but we gave them several subjects and asked them to rank them according to their priorities. And climate action ranked very high. I'm trying to find the survey results, and I can report that once I do.
Okay. And we did have another question that popped up, about 45 minutes ago. And that was, and this is, I guess, more of a logistic question than anything else. And we may be a little bit ahead of its time, but when this moves forward, this learning program moves forward, will there be that sort of customary networking where credits earned will be shared with other organizations that require continuing education credits like USGBC?
Yeah, I think that I think the idea would be to try to make these continuing education courses as beneficial and broadly applicable as possible. As you know, every organization has very specific requirements that might make that more difficult to achieve. But I think the idea here is that at the very least, we're trying to make courses that are available to both, as I mentioned, both non-architects and also architects. And the architects who are non-members of the AIA California and also members of the AIA California, and the ones who are members are required to take a certain number of health, safety, and welfare continuing education courses already, simply to maintain their membership in the AIA. So that's the hope in that. I mean, I think our greatest hope is that, you know, we can help by this and all the other strategies we're trying to take. We can help to change the professional culture of our profession, change the practice of our profession in this more positive direction.
Thank you, Rudy. So there may be other questions, but I think what I'm going to do is at this point, I'm going to exercise that discretion that I talked about earlier about flipping back and forth between our two agenda items. And that's before we take the action that's been requested of the PQ committee today, which is the action is to discuss and provide a recommendation to the board for consideration. So we're going to pause on the engagement of this agenda item now. We'll come back to it after we proceed and engage item D, which is the review and possible action on the meeting minutes. So committee members, let's move to item agenda D, and let's proceed with the possible action and review of the meeting minutes, and then we'll have some discussion there. So we are at agenda item D, as I can see on my screen. Review and possible action on January 23rd, 2020 committee minutes. I presume all committee members reviewed the meeting minutes. Do we have any discussion on the meeting minutes or motion on the meeting minutes? Board members, if you want to raise your hand, or I'm sorry, committee members. Glenn Gall.
Yeah, I'd move to approve the minutes.
Okay, do we have a motion to approve the minutes? Do we have a second?
I second the motion.
And that was who?
Raymond Chang.
Raymond Chang seconds the motion. So we have a first and a second on approval of the meeting minutes. Do we have any discussion on that? Okay, so as committee chair, I'm going to, no, I tell you what I'll do. No, because I'm going to look at you, Laura. If we take action to approve the agenda item is closed with regards to committee conversations. Is that correct?
This is Laura. You'd just be closing discussion on the minutes from the last meeting.
Okay, okay.
But if you want to revisit the minutes themselves, then yes, keep it open.
Okay, so we have a first and a second on the motion. Do we have any additional discussion on the meeting minutes? Raise a hand if you do. I don't see any raised hands.
If there's no additional discussion, I'd like to call the question. This is Betsy.
Thank you, Betsy. Let's have the vote, Mr. Vice Chair.
Pascal Gutierrez.
Yes.
Yang Peng, yes. Raymond Chen.
Yes.
Betsy Garhati.
Yes.
Glenn Ball.
Yes.
Brett Gladstone. Come back to him. Kirk Miller.
Yes.
Steve Sands.
Yes.
Stephanie Silkwood.
Yes.
Sunny Wood, who is not attending us. Another vote. Brett, are you okay now? Brett was not in last meeting. Absentee.
I'm sorry, clarification, Mr. Vice Chair, did we lose Sunny?
Well, this is his first meeting. He was not in last meeting.
Okay, all very good, so he's abstaining.
No,
Okay.
no,
This is Laura. Just a point of clarification. The board member, if a committee member wasn't at the last meeting, they're still able to vote on the minutes if they've reviewed them and are comfortable voting.
Present.
Yeah.
Unmute. Hi, this is Brett Gladstone. I wasn't at the second half of the meeting because I had a computer problem, so I will pass on voting on this one.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Vice Chair, by your count, do we have a quorum for approval of
Yes,
the
we
meeting
have
minutes?
the quorum.
Okay, great. The meeting minutes have been passed in favor of. So at this point, before we go back to the AIA presentation and the decisions or positions or discussion that we're going to have on our recommendations to the board, I'd like to have a conversation with the committee. And it's basically to keep the horse in front of the cart and keep our momentum moving forward down the field. This is, well, it's practically November of 2020. This committee will not meet again till 2021. The board is meeting in December for its final meeting of 2020. So I think we can have a healthy discussion about where we go from this point forward. And I want to start with a PQ committee summary overview of where we have been and where we have arrived. Since the commencement of this committee discussion on amending continuing education for license renewal, the committee finds that post-licensure lifelong learning continuing education benefits in maintaining the California architect's minimum levels of competency to fulfill its responsibility to protect the consumer's health, safety, and welfare. The committee has also found that the ADA and the magnitude of revisions to the California accessibility laws and regulations do not warrant repeated study and testing of knowledge every 2 years. Further findings, the current licensure renewal continuing education requirements are too narrow in content to keep pace with evolving contemporary practice and position the California architect with the credentials to best serve its consumers. The committee has also established a revitalized assessment of license renewal continuing education requirements. They being that one, that the number of continuing education units could be increased or should be considered to be increased from 5 to a range of 10 to 15. That we require architects to maintain knowledge in a larger spectrum of health, safety, and welfare subject matter topics. That we consider a continuing education framework comparable to that of the AIA and NCARB, and that we expand the requirements of knowledge of the Americans with Disabilities Act to include universal design for greater inclusivity. Additional established revitalized assessment was to expand license renewal continuing education subject matter topics. The 7 topics were general health, safety, and welfare, sustainability and resiliency, Title 24 California Building Standards Codes, ethical and professional practice, construction documents, and communications. I have 4 PQ committee discussion items that I would like to put into the roundtable to hear the committee's opinions, thoughts, and ideas. And when I say the roundtable, this is the most democratic way I could think of doing this. We'll lead off in the first round with Tian, who's at the top of the roster of the committee member roster. The second round of discussion items will be Raymond. The third round, Betsy, leading off and continuing, etc. for continuing rounds. If you have a question or request for clarification of the speaker, please raise your hand on the participants scroll in the lower right-hand screen, and please refrain from introducing any new topics of conversation so that we can remain on track. A call for any new discussions and topics will be provided once all 4 discussion items are completed. An overview of the 4 discussion items that I wish the committee to entertain are: 1, the subject matter topics, prescriptive versus non-prescriptive. 2, committee evaluation and assembly of empirical evidence to inform continuing refinement of the PQ recommendations. 3, consideration for modification of the subject matter continuing education topics. And 4, that the committee consider the bifurcating the PQ committee's body of work into parts 1 and part 2. Part 1 consisting of the PQ committee findings and revitalized assessments. Part 2 being continued refinement of the proposed amendment to licensure renewal continuing education based on the evaluation and assembly of empirical evidence and information. What this would do is that these two parts, or this proposal for bifurcating the assignment of our charge, would allow the committee to make a progressive proposal to the board for consideration at its upcoming December meeting on the amendment of licensure requirements with regards to continuing education. So, having said that, let me introduce the questions to you for conversation. Question number one, again, is the subject matter topics, prescriptive versus non-prescriptive, where the subject matter topic is a general learning area and the prescriptive content is contained within the subject matter topic. License renewal, continuing education will be applicable to all California architects regardless of their practice type. And this is important for us to understand our charge and how we deliver it. We should keep in mind that at the end of the day, the practice of architecture is a business enterprise. And if architects are provided with the ability to tailor the selection of the expertise and credentials associated with continuing education, they will be best positioned as trusted partners to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public and the consumer base they serve. So, discussion item number one, committee evaluation. Number one, subject matter topics, prescriptive versus non-prescriptive. Vice Chair Tion Feng, would you lead off, please?
Pascal, this is Laura. Can I make a comment before you get started?
Please do.
I just want to note that really the only item agendized for this discussion is the presentation of the AIA proposal. So the discussion the committee has really needs to be in context of that item, and that's what the committee can act on.
Very well. So I'm going to restructure my content, and I would like, as we go back to formulating our recommendation to the board for consideration of the AIA proposal, I would like the committee to keep in mind subject matter topic, prescriptive versus non-prescriptive, the committee evaluation and assembly of empirical evidence to inform continuing refinement of the PQ recommendations. And I think I need to stop with that. So let's go back to item E, where the committee is asked to provide a recommendation to the board for consideration of the zero net carbon design, 5 additional learning units, and have a discussion as to how the AI proposal should be woven into the related strategic plan objective. So let's go back to agenda item E. So agenda item E, presentation by American Institute of Architects, California, on proposed continuing education requirement on climate action and decarbonization. So we had a series of questions that were asked and answered by the AIA. Are there any additional committee questions that want to surface at this time? Raise a hand, please. Steve, okay, so I see him coming up in order. So let's start with Steve Sands.
Thanks, Pascal. I just wanted to clarify the questions that I had provided the committee are based on what I think the board and AIA, the questions they'll have to answer if they go forward with a legislative proposal. I think Mark can speak to that. I just wanted to clarify why I provided those questions. Again, if the board decides on a global sense they want to go ahead with a continuing education program, those are typically the types of questions that you have to answer for both the administration and the legislature. And it seems like on your main topic, you're talking about prescriptive. I definitely get the feeling that the AIACC's proposal is definitely prescriptive for those 5 hours. So that's all I wanted to throw in.
Thank you, Steve. Stephanie, you're up. If you take your hand down, Steve, please. Stephanie, you're next.
So my question related to the presentation is about the offering of free courses by the AIA, and I agree very much that the courses that have been provided for accessibility by the AIA have been outstanding, and so I would be excited to have that offering available of the free courses for this subject. I'm just curious if the free course has been given a timeline. You know, will the AIA provide free courses indefinitely on this subject matter, or has there been sort of a timeline that's been established for that?
Would AIA like to respond to that, please?
No timeline has been applied to this. I think we're, as an organization, we're committed to whatever it takes to promote climate action, and I think we have every confidence that we can continue to provide this as long as it's needed.
And then a follow-up question I have, or maybe just a discussion item for the committee to consider, is if we were to adopt this program, I assume that it would be similar to our current license renewal requirements, where you would be self-reporting the continuing education. And then also we would then open up the subject to non-AIA providers, so that this subject matter would not be limited to be provided by AIA California.
Right. We don't intend to become a monopoly. The more folks that are kind of providing this information, the better. I think our only concern is, I think one that might be shared by CAB, is that that the quality of the courses be held to a very high standard, and that's something that we feel we can do ourselves very well. But I think there have been some concerns about in the world of accessibility, continuing education. There have been some concerns about the quality of the course materials provided by others. So, I mean, that would be up to the legislature to kind of decide how to do that.
Thank you, William. Any further questions, Stephanie?
No, not right now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So next in line is Kirk Miller.
Yes, William, I applaud the AICC and what you're doing here. It's certainly needed. My question has to do with what is the status of a recent graduate of the School of Architecture? What is his or her knowledge going to be with regards to climate change and net zero carbonation? And have you given any thought as to how to approach schools of architecture to get this within their curriculum?
Yes, the AIA National and AIA California is working to increase awareness of these topics within academia. And in fact, I'm a teacher as well as an architect, and I'm finding, and also in talking around the country, I'm finding that it's the younger generation, the undergraduates and the recent graduates of architecture, who really get this stuff, probably more so than folks of our age. So I think the good news is they are passionate about the younger generation knows that they have, as we say, the ultimate skin in the game on this, and I think they are extremely passionate and motivated about embracing this. So if anything, I think we will find that group of folks, the younger generation of architects and just graduating architects, to be the ones that don't need any convincing that this is important, and they're the ones that are going to be all over this. I think it's the folks who have been practicing for a while and who might be a little bit more challenged by learning this stuff. But I think the other point I want to really stress is that this is not rocket science, and that we can help provide tools to make it clear that it's not such a terrible or an awful thing to do, and that it's good business.
Excellent. Thank you, Ron.
Pascal, are you looking for the next raise?
Right, you're next, yeah.
Okay. So for the benefit of the committee, PQC committee members who are not signed in on the last board meeting, the intent of the board meeting directed this issue at the PQC committee was based on the context. PQC committee has studied the issue in the past, beyond a year or maybe two. So the board was hoping that based on our study today, which very nicely summarized by Pascal in the 4 areas. So this is the intent. I think it's important for the committee to know that we are looking at this issue, although it's responding to AIA's proposal, but our consideration should tie into the work we have been doing in the past 2 years. So I encourage, when you think about issues, resolutions, if we are going to arrive some, it is the best tie back to the 4th area that we collectively came up with, as Pascal summarized. And I see we can do that. So, for example, if Pascal, can I just take an opportunity to talk about my response to item number E?
You have the floor. You have the floor, Tian, if you have a question.
Okay. So I see the responding to AI proposal can be very well connected to the 4 findings that we collectively came up in the past few years. In responding to the first questions, Pascal mentioned about the prescriptive versus how do you call it? The prescriptive versus.
I think it's prescriptive versus non-prescriptive.
Okay, I call them aspirational. So I think this is something that for the committee member to think that what IIA leadership is really told us here is low carbon is the key to combat climate change, and then how this knowledge should be gained by all architects who practice in California, and that is a very specific call for action of learning. So, but if we look at it in less prescriptive or more aspirational, that means what is the architect's responsibility to our environment? So that ties into one of the 4 categories that we have mentioned. So I just want hope to building that bridge for the committee members who were not at the board meeting and explain what is the intent. The board directed these items to the committee. Hopefully come up with some of very informed next steps so the board can act on it. So that's what I have for now.
Please hit the hand button again to take that down. Kirk, I don't know if you have another question or if that's a carryover from your first question. If you don't have another question, if you could take your hand down. And that takes us to Glenn Gall next.
Yeah, Bill, thanks for the presentation. And for Bill and Mark both, I was wondering your perception of the adequacy of 5 hours of continuing education to cover this very broad subject, frankly. I was thinking of all of the continuing education that I've engaged in during times of Zoom and COVID, and 5 hours wouldn't even begin to approach some of the subject matter I've run into and the depth of knowledge that really needs to be gained by most practitioners. So just your opinions on that, please.
Oops. Sorry. It is a big topic, but I think it can be distilled into, a few basic tenets, a few basic simple strategies that every architect needs to be thinking about. If it would be nicer to have more hours, sure. But I think the bottom line is that, as I mentioned earlier, and as you folks also probably know, there's been traditional resistance to adding mandatory continuing education to required for licensure in the state. So we're trying to be sensitive to that, at the same time get a foothold and at least try to start educating folks at the beginning. I firmly believe that we are at the edge of a tipping point globally around climate action. It's already started. It's already happening, but unfortunately too slowly. And so I believe that if we can even start with 5 learning units every 2 years, I think the tipping point can be helped along. I mean, I think an interesting case in point is that I've actually given a course, an accredited course for the accessibility continuing ed points based on some of my work, and every year when I take the test, or 2 years when I take the test, I actually still learn something, which is actually a good thing. But I also, what prompted this whole initiative was actually me taking my test last year and thinking, this is great. I'm learning some more information about accessibility and universal design, but why am I not taking classes in zero carbon design, which is the #1 most important thing that every architect needs to know today? So that's why I think this is important, and that's why I believe we can make a difference with this. I think 5 is a good place to start, I guess, basically is what I'm trying to say.
Thank you, William. Glenn, is there any other questions?
Just one. In your presentation, you said this would be implemented 2023. Is that correct?
That's the hope.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, William, again, and Glenn. Next in the queue is Betsy.
There we go. Finally unmute. So thank you, Bill, for a really comprehensive presentation. I am an adamant supporter of this concept, as is. I do believe that for it to be limited to 5 hours over 2 years will gather support and hopefully prevent any pushback that we might otherwise anticipate. In my view, this is the most important thing we can be doing. It should be mandatory. It should be specifically focused on the decarbonization issue, climate action. This is a survival issue. And as architects, we can be leaders. We've been talking about being leaders in sustainability for how many years? Too many years. And I think we've obviously made a lot of inroads, but we need to take this to the next level. And I'm licensed in other states, and California's requirements are lesser than other states. They're lesser than AIA membership. And this will be applicable to that. And I'm happy to know that there will be conversations with USGBC as an example to make sure that people can apply some of these credits, hopefully, to their requirements for being LEED credited. But I think that's important because it will be attractive to those people, and hopefully there will be more of those people. But some of the things that I'm thinking about, maybe it's because of my age, And the question was asked about students is, how does this kick in when you're a newly licensed architect? And I'm happy to know that free continuing education units will go along with it. I think that's critical to being able to make this possible for those young people first coming into the profession. And then I'm looking at those at the other end of their career, and that is people like me who are going to be retiring in the next few years. And I know that there's a way that we can sort of ratchet back on the cost of being able to sustain our license. So then the question is going to be, and this is for all continuing education requirements required for California license, including the ADA requirements, how will that apply to those people? And some of them may even have cognitive issues, you know, if we want to get real about it, so they can still call themselves an architect and hold on to the title. I think that's an extremely important and sensitive area that we need to consider. I don't know what the answer to it is. And then someone else brought up the fact that this will apply to all licensed architects in California, because we know not everybody's in private practice. And certainly the work that we're doing right now in a large firm, and we've always done work that's either commercial in nature or public in nature, and it's more complicated to those people who are perhaps sole proprietors and doing custom homes. It's a different world, yes. And what if you're a licensed architect and you're not in private practice at all, and you're working for an agency or who knows what, you know, real estate developer? My perspective is this should apply to all licensed architects. We all need this body of knowledge. I don't care what you're doing career-wise, that this is a responsibility for us, in fact, to be able to lead at a time when our survival is at stake. It is that important. So, Bill, thank you for all of your work. I'm all in, obviously.
I don't see any other hands for additional questions. So at this point, before we consider a motion that we want to send back to the board, I just want you, I'm going to ask Bill or Mark to just reaffirm what the request is of your proposal, which I believe is to add 5 more additional continuing education units for net zero design. So, but I want to ask you to phrase your proposal request. So, could you do that, please?
Sure, and I'll ask Mark to jump in as well. But I think the request from you folks is I think our goal is to work closely with the California Architects Board in helping to frame this together. We know that we can't do it by ourselves. We know that it's a legislative process that will require a lot of steps along the way. So I think first and foremost, I think what we're looking for is an agreement that this is important, and that we can work together and we can support each other in this process. And I know that we can help support the other aspects of your agenda as well. But I think that's number one. And I think number two is the idea of specifically the 5 additional learning units, and providing the courses for free by AIA California. I think those are the key points. But the most fundamental point is we're hoping to get agreement that this is an important initiative, that as Betsy so eloquently put, it really is a matter of survival. And I think it's also a matter of the fact that architects have a huge role to play in that survival. So,
thank you, William. So I will just overview for the board, for the committee again. The intent here, or the request, is that we agree that this initiative is important, that we have the ability to work together with AIA to bring it to fruition, and that the end game is 5 additional continuing education licensing renewal units. So,
Pascal, question?
yes, so that's Kirk Miller from the Sound of Wolves.
Bill and Mark, have you given any consideration to the division of labor between AICC staff and members and CAB staff and CAB board members to implement this? The bottom line being how much staff time is going to have.
Hi, Kirk, this is Mark Christian. Very little thought has been put into that for right now. I think we need to explore the legality of it. And if it is legal, what type of language would have to be included in the legislation to be able to do that? Whatever we do, which is why we're having these conversations. One of several reasons why we're having the conversations with CAB and the committees of the CAB, or the PQ committee of the CAB, is to make sure that whatever is done, it is the most efficient process possible to make it as easy as possible for CAB to implement it. Whether that is AIA California doing a part of it, whether it is mirroring the existing disabled access continuing education requirement. So it's just another checkbox, on the form that already has to be submitted. Whatever it is, the implementation of it, we want to make sure it works with CAB. And if there are any opportunities to make further improvements to the implementation of the existing accessibility continuing education, let's look at this as a vehicle to make those changes as well. Not the content of the 5 hours of accessibility. That's not on the table to touch, but the processing of it. Processing of the
good. Thank you.
Hey, and Pascal, if I may, real quickly, just to follow up, earlier in the meeting, you asked if we have talked to our members about it, and I mentioned a survey. We do a survey of the membership every year on advocacy-related issues, and one of the questions in our survey was, we gave them a list of 12 topics and asked them to choose the 3 that are their highest priority. And these are general topics, anywhere from tort reform to building codes to project delivery. The one that received the most votes by far, nearly 60% of the respondents chose it, was sustainability, climate change. And the other, the next ones were building codes and housing. Both of them, just a bit under 40% of the respondents chose those. This is not a scientific survey. I cannot describe it that. But if it is a finger on the pulse of the AIA membership, if it can be construed that way, certainly it received the largest response from those who responded to the survey.
Thank you, Mark. I think next on the queue is Steve Sands.
Thanks, Pasquale. To put it succinctly, I think what the committee is being asked to do is to recommend to the board to support AIA's proposal to add 5 hours of continuing education as a condition for a license renewal. And I think that, Mark and I have worked in the legislature for decades. I think that's really succinctly what the committee is asked to do. I think in the future, if the committee and the board decides to move forward, there's lots and lots of logistical things you're going to have to address. You don't want to get too much in the weeds today. I really think you want to focus on the concept of, does the committee want to go forward with this proposal? And it could be that, depending on your board meeting schedule, you have one in December, the board may want to support the committee's recommendation, or they could say, we want to do further study and get all these other questions answered, so they could support AIA's legislative proposal in the spring. You'll have plenty of time, if AI goes forward, to have a finalized plan in early spring. Those are alternatives you might want to consider, but I just encourage you not to get too much in the weeds and focus on the general policy, and figure out a way to work with AIA to answer all those questions and work out all those logistical details by setting up a task force or whatever. Those are things I think the committee might want to consider, because there will be a lot of stuff that staff will have to address. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Steve. I believe Sunny's next in the queue, then followed by Stephanie.
Yeah, so I was about to get in the weeds, so I'm glad you stopped me, Steve. But I do have a couple of questions, because just from our previous board meeting, it was my understanding that there were some pretty important questions that we were, or that the board was looking to the committee to answer. And so while us all coming to a consensus that this is a great idea, my concern is that we go back and say this is a great idea, but then a lot of those questions are still left unanswered, and how will that slow this process down? And that seems to be kind of, again, I'm stepping into this a little bit late, but it seems to be that might be one of the problems, is that getting a clear list of questions and quick answers to those questions to better help the people who are voting on this, or taking it to the next level, to just sort of getting all the information quickly and in one place so that everybody can make an informed decision. And I'm just going to add this on just one more time, because I do think it is in the weeds, but I'm going to say it anyway, and we don't have to talk about it unless somebody has a really quick answer. But I just wanted to be reminded, because it was way before my time, but I just wanted to be reminded how the ADA learning units became the requirement for the learning units in the state of California. Like, why that the only learning units that we have, I mean, obviously I understand ADA and that it's important, but what was the reasoning? Was it directed by the legislature, or was that CAB, or did CAB decide to do that specifically?
Sunny, this is Laura. To address your question, it was a mandate of the legislature. It came from the disability access community, and it came through legislation. It was not the board's idea.
Okay, so with that in mind, that's what I thought. With that in mind, has there been any directive by the legislature in regards to this, what we're talking about today?
I think the short answer is no.
Okay, so my follow-up question to that is, again, I'm new on the board, do we have the authority to project this kind of policy at the state level, both in the committee and as board members?
I want to defer to Laura, because we've been reminded in the past that there is a process to augment or amend current law by any way, shape, or form with regards to continuing education. So, Laura, do you want to remind everybody what that is?
Sure. So we have the disability access requirement in statute. That's all the board has the authority to do. So to get a new CE requirement would require additional statutory authority. So someone would need to go to the legislature, sponsor legislation, and get it enacted for us to have a new requirement.
I was just going to, if it's okay, this is Mark Christian, AI California. I can add it to that answer a bit. As Laura mentioned, the existing 5 hours in accessibility was added by legislation. I believe it was 2006, SB 1608. That was a large bill, dealt with many things, primarily focusing on the so-called, litigation accessibility lawsuits on businesses. It changed that process a little bit. It created the California Commission on Disability Access, and it also, among other things, established the continuing education requirement on architects. The Some of the disabled community wanted, I believe, was 18 hours a year and relicensure every 3 years with the new building code. That obviously did not happen, but 5 hours every 2 years was put in there. And this was supported by the business community and supported by the disabled community. The legislation often is created with ideas submitted to legislators from outside groups. That is a normal process. And so AIA California, in this instance, would be that outside group. The sponsoring entity is the term that's used in the California Capitol. AIA California would sponsor this proposal with a legislator who would be the author of it. And so they would introduce the bill. They would carry it through the process with us at their side pretty much every step. The option that the California Architects Board has through whatever process it must do is to take a position on it, whatever that position may be, or to take no position on it. But AIA California would be the sponsoring entity, and it would be our job to find a legislator willing to carry it. And that's a very normal part of the legislative process.
Thank you very much. I needed that. And I will end with my current sort of logic in that that all sounds great and what I expected. My concern is that if we project 5 hours out and we want 5 hours, we're not going to get 5. We may end up with 1 or none. So it seems like you might want to ask for more, 10 hours. And let it be whittled back to 5. Just a thought on my end.
Thank you, Sonny. So that would take us to the next person in the queue, which is Stephanie Silkwood.
So I think one of the things we have to consider is what is the motion that we would want to make here. And when I keep thinking about what our conversation was at previous meetings was about the 12 hours and the 15 hours or whatever we want it to be. So I think the question here is, do we want this 5 hours to be part of the expanded mandatory continuing education requirement that we would propose to the board? And for me, my opinion is yes, this should absolutely be part of the expanded program. And it's not necessarily asking AIA California to administer any sort of new program. AIA California is going to provide new courses, and we need to decide if climate action is one of our 12 or 15 hours that we want to include as part of the prescriptive requirement. And I think when I think back of our previous conversations, we had talked about maybe having some prescriptive and some non-prescriptive, a mix of both of those. And so I think my opinion is it would be great to see we keep the ADA, accessibility requirement. That would be challenging to touch. I would like to see the 5 hours incorporated, and then also maybe see some flexible continuing education credits in that mix as well. The other thing that if we're going down a path that we're going to propose new continuing education requirements, I think it would be good for this group and for the board to consider how do we build flexibility into the future of the content that's required. If, say, for example, 10 years from now, we've all come so far that we no longer need 5 hours of continuing education on climate action, how would we revise the content of the requirement? And that's maybe something for future discussion. But I think that flexibility might be key if we expand this continuing education program.
Thank you, Stephanie. Just a quick answer to your question. If our expanded continuing education requirements were non-prescriptive subject matter, I believe then the prescriptive content of those non-prescriptive subject matters could be allowed to flex back and forth. That would be, I would think, the easiest way to do it. Do you have any other questions, Stephanie, at this point?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, so if you would take your hand down, that takes us next to Mr. Raymond Cheng.
Thank you, Pasquale. I just make it quick. I think I agree with all my colleagues' comments so far. I think it's a perfect subject matter. I think we should go ahead and forward it to the board. The only thing I want to ask AIACC is that we have to be a little careful, make sure AIACC is prepared to handle all the renewal candidates. In other words, if you want them to do it and there is not enough classes and structure to help them, and that become a barrier for them to renew the license, that become a big problem for us. But if we have enough planning time to make sure that when come time to renew, they can get access to qualify that continuing education, that I think will be in good shape. So I think that's my only concern. Thanks a lot, Bill and Mark, for your presentation. It's the right thing to do, but I think we need to make sure we can answer the legislature that requirement, any requirement, does not become a barrier for them to renew the license, whether paid or unpaid. If you can't get it renewed, we got a big problem.
Thank you, Raymond.
Thank you.
Let's see, Sonny, you took. So Sonny, your hands keeps popping up. Am I going to come back to you? You have another question?
I do.
Okay, great. Okay, I'll come back to you.
And again, it doesn't.
I'll come back to you, Sonny.
Okay.
Okay. Next in the queue is Kirk Miller.
Steve, thank you for getting into the weeds a little bit. I sort of jumped ahead to design development or working drawings. And right now, AICC is presented with a concept, and we're looking at it. So hopefully when it gets to the board in December, it will be at the schematic design stage. Still very, very preliminary. A lot of work to be done. So if we could sort of use that as an analogy, I think that might, for the architects on the board anyway, that would give a perspective where we are and how it's an incremental process. So lots of stuff to be done downstream as we get into design, development, working drawings, and then finally construction. Sonny, your point about asking for 10 to end up with 5, I was thinking about that earlier, and let's assume we want frog legs for dinner. Like lobster, you have to cook them live. So you never throw that frog into boiling water because it jumps out. And if we were to ask for 10, that frog would jump out. So I think Bill hit it on when he said start with 5, because there's no opposition to that. If you had 10, then the members of the AIACC would maybe jump up in arms. So again, if we can look upon this as trying to get a frog, we put it in room temperature water, and then we slowly turn the heat up until we end up with a cooked frog that we want, which is mandatory 5 hours of continuing education for climate change.
Thank you, Kirk. If you're done, if you could take your hand down, and Raymond, if you could take your hand down, unless you have another question. And Kirk, you've given me a whole different idea for trick-or-treating at the door with cooked frogs. The next person in the queue is Tian.
Can I let Brett speak first, and I do like after that.
Okay, so Tian yields to Brett.
Hi. First, thanks to the AIA for the presentation. As a lawyer, I tend to be very cautious and perhaps a little too slow for some, but I wonder if it's premature to vote without hearing back from the AIA in writing on the questions for committee consideration that was sent to them. They may not have time to digest it all. and it may be too much for, it would be too long a meeting for us to ask them to address all these questions. I think all board members got a copy and the AIA got a copy. I'm not sure. I think they got them at the same time. But, you know, there's a lot of good questions in here. You know, one of them is, and this was discussed at the end of this was discussed in the last committee meeting and was reflected in the minutes about whether the, you know, this should wait for the next occupational analysis from the CAB or the NCARB PA. That's one question. There's a number of others, and I would pause on voting for this today without hearing responses from the AIA on these questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Brett.
May I comment on that?
William?
Yes.
Yes, please.
I mean, I guess I would say that first of all, I was to extend the cuisine metaphor that Kirk was using. Another form of French cuisine. You know, I think one of the challenges here is to completely embrace the idea of the climate emergency, the fact that action is urgent, and that if we don't, if we move it at snail's pace, we're going to be having escargot instead of real action. So I think I would say AIA California would be happy to very quickly respond with it in writing to the letter, to the questions that have been asked. But many of the questions are asking, as both Mark and I have probably made clear, are asking, and Kirk alluded to it as well, are asking questions that are way down the road and way in the weeds relative to how this actually is all going to happen, what the actual thing. We can't tell you exactly how all that's going to work out. We can tell you what we've told you. I think the most important point here is the concept of doing this and why it's important, and then working out the details along side by side with all of you to make sure that it is efficient and effective as possible.
Thank you, William.
Hey, Pasquale, this is Mark Christian, AI California. If I may just add to that.
Sure, please do.
Thank you. To follow on the analogy, if that's the right term, that Kirk brought up, this will not be in the construction document form until, I believe it is, the end of August of 2020. After it goes through the legislative process, I should say the final form.
I'm sorry, Mark, you said 2020.
2021, thank you very much, my mistake. You think everyone would be eager to get out of 2020, and here I am trying to stay in it. In 2021, definitely. It's not going to be, the final plans approved until the end of August. It is going to be changing. Think of it as documents with the legislature doing its amendments, the red pens, and resubmittals. So this is going to be a living document until August of 2021.
Thank you, Mark.
Pascal, this is Laura. If I could just interject really quick. Sorry to interrupt the discussion. So I understand what Mark's saying, that it's a living document until you get through the legislative session. But I mean, this is a basic concept we're talking about here. And it's one thing to support the concept, but for the board to consider supporting it, we need to know the details of what is the requirement going to look like? What is the impact going to be on licensees? What's it going to do to the license renewal process? What is the impact on board staff? I mean, there are a lot of details the board's should want to consider before weighing in beyond just supporting the concept to actually supporting this requirement. And that information is not there right now.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, Brett, I'm going to ask you to take your hand down unless you have another question, and we're going to Keon next in the queue.
Yeah, that is actually good transition here. So I hope you still refresh the memory still in your mind that what Stephanie has said, and then combine what Laura just stated, with the purpose for the full board to directed this at this committee is that you exercise your expertise, inform board, and more broader pictures. And we know board will support that proposal. We know that. We know how important the energy and the climate issue is, but the board did not have the benefit of the history of the studies that as a business practice entity of CAB. So what board is looking for, again, for each member, I ask you, is bring back that the value of this committee and inform board members, half of them not even architects, that why we're supporting, how do we support it, how this support will be incorporated or enhanced as a part of overall CAB's objective in modernizing our learning, mandatory learning requirements. So again, keep think that way, then your recommendation or report to the full board will be most valuable. The reason, as the chair of the board, I requested that this meeting move to from the next year to before this board meeting. I try to cut 1 year of time. How, if we will have this informative discussions, that the outcome of this discussion will easily digested by the full board, and then the full board can act on it. So I really ask each member to think if we are going to formulate a motion today or we are not formulating a motion, but the report that Pascal and Laura will present to the full board should quickly lead to a strong statement of support, yet leave a door wide open. How can CAB and AIACC work together in modernizing our mandatory continuing education? So that is, I want just interject this again.
Thank you, Tian. If you could take your hand down if you're done, that would put us. We're back to Sunny.
Okay, sorry, bear with me. A couple multi-parts here. First of all, I totally support. I totally support this. I want, if that hasn't been clear, I want it to be clear. And to go back to Kirk's comment about the frogs getting out of the pot, where I was headed with the 10 hours wasn't necessarily 10 hours of carbon classes. It was leaving open the door more to what Stephanie was talking about a more sort of a full plate, a more rounded array of architects in our state, and the things that, back to what Pasquale said earlier about it being a business, allowing people to participate at the level at which they want to have expertise. So that's where I wasn't necessarily advocating for 10 carbon classes, but also I'd like to tie that back to what I believe, and Tian and Pasquale and Brett, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like there's been a few other conversations at the board level outside of these particular carbon classes, like other types of classes that would protect the consumers of California in addition to climate change. And so that's where my head is going, and I just want to make sure that if we're doing this, that it feels like we've been handcuffed with the accessibility requirements in the way that we are. So in doing this, that we don't do that again and tie us up in the future. So that was kind of where I was headed with that. And then lastly, this may be a question more for Laura, but maybe also for Mark and Bill. Are there other professional boards in the state of California that have relationships with professional organizations in their field.
Sunny, do you mean do like the board and the association, other types of boards, do they work with their association?
Well, work, yes, but and maybe that I answered myself. I need to ask a clearer question. What is this relationship that's being proposed between CAB and AIA? Is it like, is the law dependent on that relationship, or can we just have the law? I guess is my point. Like, shouldn't the requirement just be for carbon classes?
So I guess I would say AIA can go forward without the board's support with this proposal. I think the legislature would look, though, they would ask the board to see, you know, if we have a position, what the impact would be on the board, and that would be something to consider. But certainly AIA could go forward without the board support. It's not required in any way. Does that help?
One part, yes. The other part is there a suggestion that I'm hearing that the AIA do the work for CAB, and that be like in order to make this successful? Or, and I guess let me tie that back to the accessibility units. The oversight for that, who wrote the oversight for that? How did that come into being? Was that written by CAB, or was that written by an outside unit?
So on the disability access, that was before my time here, but I was with the Department of Consumer Affairs Legislative Office, and that came from an outside party. But then the legislative staff will work with the department's legislative staff and board staff, even though the board may not have had a position on it, they'll ask them for their technical assistance on how to make it workable. So even if the board doesn't have a position, we'll get asked that.
So to Mark and Bill, AIA can write that outline. We can also comment on it, but then the legislature would ultimately pass and deal with that.
Mark, you want to comment on?
Absolutely. Sunny, I would think on an issue like this, the legislature will gladly go along with what AIA California and CAB says is workable. So that's we want to make sure that this is workable for CAB. This is not one of those issues. I don't see it that way. This is not one of those issues that they're going to say, hey, we think as the elected legislators in California, we know about this more than you do. We're going to tell you how it's done. I don't think this is one of those issues. This is not like an independent contractor issue that we see on TV every night.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
Thanks.
Sunny, if you're done, if you would take your hand down, and then that would take us back to Chef Miller and then Stephanie.
Laura, I really appreciated your comment about what's downstream, and that was one of the reasons why I jumped into the weeds, perhaps a bit early. But I go back to my roots in Canada, where it's a normal legislative process there, and it occurs in some places in states, but in Canada, you always have 2 or 3 readings. And the first reading is conceptual or schematic stage. And the governing body, that's a great concept. We like that concept. Proceed with it, but you got to do this, 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 and this, or we expect you to do this, this, and this. And once you're downstream a little bit, you come back with maybe design development, and you get a second reading. And then when you're ready to start construction, you come back with construction documents as the third reading. They get, go ahead, build it. So we won't get to that in August, as Mark has said, when the legislature with it. And then even there's a further one downstream when the legislature comes back, and it's got to come before the board, and the board adopts what the legislation has told them. So I think there's lots of room to fill in all those blanks that you're talking about, things with Mark's experience in the legislative process and dealing with CAB. He's been down that road before, and with Steve in some cases, and you've been through this route before too. That will all fall into place. So all the board needs to do, and what we need to advise the board to do, is accept the concept, so that the AIA knows that they have our support at the conceptual level. It allows them to do more work more progressively, and they got our support in hand. which is the important thing for it to move forward, because they don't want to go in there solo. They want to go in with us. I think, Mark.
Thank you, Kirk. If you could take your hand down if you're done. Mark, did you want to respond to that before I go on to Stephanie?
I agree with Kirk. Definitely, we want to work with the CAB on this, not only at the conceptual level, but importantly in the fine details as this works its way through the legislative process, which we will do, of course.
Thank you, Mark. So, Stephanie, you're up.
I agree with Kirk, and one of the things I was thinking about is, one of our hesitations right now is we wanted to see an occupational analysis that says, what does a comprehensive new continuing education program look like? How many hours should it be? What should it include? Are there ways, without waiting for the occupational analysis, that we could craft that bigger picture, including this portion that AIA wants to include, to get the pulse of the profession, if there would be support for, say a 12 or 15 hour that includes these items. I was just wondering if that's a way we could expedite some of this a little bit, because I don't feel great about supporting just adding the 5 hours, because I think that's only getting us part of the way of where we want to go. And so if we were to have this, we have our 5 hours of accessibility, we add our 5 hours of climate action, but then we agree we still haven't reached the finish line. It seems like it would have been a waste to go through all this effort when there's still maybe a little bit something missing. So how could we get more information about what else is still missing? That's my only question.
Stephanie. Thank you for your comments. If you could take your hand down next in the queue. I'm not sure it was a horse race here as to who popped up first, but I'm going to go with ladies first. Betsy?
Thank you. I think it might have been Kurt, but I have been waiting. And thank you, Stephanie, for your comments. I think they're very thoughtful, but we also know how long all of this takes. And I'd like to propose maybe, we talk a little bit about all these hybrid approaches now that we're trying to do everything in a hybrid way, whether it's education or practice. Perhaps that we float the concept of looking at expanded continuing education in California, and that we have one that's pre-existing, which is a legal issue, so it can't be touched. We all know the history of that. And then the second one will be this next 5 hours. And I'd like to see that move forward because it's going to take a long time. It's not going to be there in 2023 if we don't start now. I think everybody understands that. With the door open that we will consider anything above and beyond that, and anticipate that there's going to be conversation related to anything above and beyond, but that we go ahead and get this released first. If we don't do it, it's not going to happen, guys. It's not going to happen before we all retire and go home. So I'd really like to suggest that we support Bill's motion, and maybe with a friendly amendment that there would be continuing conversations about a holistic approach to mandatory continuing education and other subject matters within California. I don't know if that's doable, but maybe that's an option.
Okay, thanks, Betsy. Before anyone jumps to the motion, I would like everyone to speak, and then we'll have time to sort of discuss and formulate or shape a motion. So let's not go to the motion part yet. Thank you, Betsy. That would take us to, and I do have a quick question before I go to Tion, and then it looks like, before I go to Kirk and then Tion. And that is, Laura, at the strategic planning meeting of the board, the PQ committee was charged with looking at an amendment to license renewal continuing education. Did that not include, or maybe perhaps there's been a misunderstanding, doesn't that include a look at completely revitalizing licensure renewal continuing education?
This is Laura. I mean, I don't have the objective in front of me. As I recall, it was pretty broad, so it could really involve anything. As you know, the PQ committee has talked about this quite a bit, but it hasn't made it to the point of making a recommendation for the board to consider.
No, there's no recommendation to the board, but I thought the strategic plan initiative was for the committee to look at amendment to current law that would be responsive to a more evolving practice, which then I think opens the door that if the committee were to reassess the entire package, we're not necessarily locked down and working around the 5 current hours that are in the books.
The committee could always come forward with another proposal, certainly. Yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I just wanted the committee to hear that. Marcus, did you want to interject before I go to committee members?
If you don't mind, Pasquale. Yes, I wanted to say that the objective is very broad, and it is about bringing continuing education into alignment with the evolving practice. So it has included a variety of different suggestions at the last meeting to add anywhere from 15 to 18 hours of continuing ed.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So let's go to Mr. Miller.
Thank you. Stephanie, thank you for bringing up the occupational analysis. I had a note on it earlier and I skipped over it. Occupational analysis, it's always a question of how they're derived and all kinds of questions about that and so forth, and it sort of could muddy the waters. I'd rather not wait this specific item because the AIA has taken the lead on it, and they're going with the flow because the state of California is trying to take the lead on climate issues, and so this is perfect timing for this specific issue. If we were to mix in these other things with it, rather than getting this frog cooked, beautiful frog legs at the end of it, we're going to be throwing other ingredients in, so we're getting a stew out of it. So that would be my analogy there. And then the other reason for going ahead with the 5 hours for climate change now is an incremental approach. Because if we were to take in everything, the 15 to 18 hours, it would muddy the water, and the specific point we're talking about would get mud all over it and get slowed down. So I think we need to focus on this specifically. Take account what Laura has said, and make sure we don't get ahead of ourselves. We don't get ahead of ourselves on the skis, and we don't get too far in the weeds, as Steve is saying. So I think all the ingredients are here. It sounds like there's a consensus, as far as I can tell, for the few questions from here. So I would support Betsy's motion when she gets to the point of making it.
Okay, so we're holding off on the motion. Thank you, Kirk.
Yes.
If you're done, can you please take your hand down?
Yes.
And then I'm going to interject the conversation by advising the committee that AIA does have a white paper out. If you haven't had a chance to read it, you may find it very beneficial. The title of the white paper is Where We Stand, Climate Action. And it reads in part, the American Institute of Architects calls on architects around the world to support humanity's collective call to climate action through an unrelenting commitment to sustainable and resilient design. And further states that as a profession, we have the responsibility to prioritize and support effective actions to exponentially decelerate the production of greenhouse gases contributing to climate change. Our goal, as set forward by AIA and partners like the Architecture 2030, is net zero emissions in the building sector by 2050. I just thought that that'd be important information for the committee to be aware of. So continuing in the queue, let's go to Tion and then followed by Brett.
Okay. So looking back, I assume we are receiving the report from this committee at the full board meeting. I have in my mind as a chair for the full board 2 issues I want to have a direction from this committee. I have a recommendation from this committee. One is I think we have arrived consensus that AIA's leadership in adding mandatory unit
Keon,
Yeah.
if you're about to suggest a motion, can I ask you to hold on that, please?
No, I'm not doing a motion. I'm
Okay, thank you.
my remark.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So on that regards, so I think we should. I hope that we arrive consensus and our positions clear to advise the full board that we support the leadership of AIA in that enhancement of continuing education that is most relevant to the energy and the climate. At the same time, the motion from this committee, I hope, also advises the full board how this move have well enhanced the overall our board's work on modernizing or enhancing our mandatory continuing education requirement. So I think that will go a long way. And if the full board can take action, then we can respond to the AIA favorably, because they do have some timelines, want to see a more supportive statement from this board. So anyway, that's how I hope that we have some level of consensus and will arrive a recommendation really informs the full board in December.
Thank you, Keon. If you could take your hand down if you're done, and let's go to Brett.
And Tien's, and you know, I said earlier I wanted to slow down a little. It's not that I'm not in support of this, and if there's going to be a consensus of this committee in support of it, you know, I would suggest that, you know, along with the recommendation to the board to go with the additional 5 hours for zero net energy, we asked the board to look in, to establish one of the committees to look into whether there's some continuing education requirements that are very old and don't need to be part of the curriculum as much, and whether there should be substitutions for the portions that aren't as important as they were when they were first implemented as requirements, and that we asked, you know, other members of their profession, other trade groups, maybe they're related, other than the AIA, if there are suggestions for updating, removing some of the old ones and adding some in addition to zero net energy, but with an idea of I don't think we need the burden of adding more than 5, except if there's a very good, without first considering what in the existing requirements may be old and maybe should no longer exist or not exist in the form they're in today.
Thank you, Brett. If you could take your hand down. I see, Tion, your hand is still up. Is that a new question or comment?
New question, new comment.
Let's go to you.
Okay. So responding to Brett, actually the few committee members, if not all, was very much into the thoughts of what you have mentioned. That is, I recall, was one of the main reasons we launched that modernization work, because, you know, so 25 years ago, when that ADA requirement was implemented, it would make huge sense, because ADA was just enacted by federal government, and it was wonderful ideas to have architects to have a full understanding and design such a inclusive facility. But to today, this is really inadequate, and also all the regulations make you to do so, and you cannot even get your building permit without to do so. So that was a starting point, right? It's very well said. However, after heard many, experienced people in this arena, which is legislative arena, That seems it's not a wise approach. Try to replace this requirement with a new requirement. So we try to honestly, it looks like, find a shortcut to get our modernization going. So this is my kind of response to your question. So I don't know if everyone's still on the same page. We can take a challenge. For example, people really would design community to do today are inclusive designs with universal design concept, not just accommodate a few forms of a physically impaired groups. So anyway.
Thank you, Tiana. If you could take your hand down if you're done, and we have Betsy up.
Thank you. I'll make this very brief because there are a few of us who were on this committee at the time that 5 hours for ADA was implemented. I just wanted to remind everybody this was legal action that was taken, trying to take away from architects the ability to be able to even provide excess compliant work, that we were going to be forced to hire a third-party consultant, and that was kind of the birth of the whole CASP program. And so this was a negotiation that we agree to meet that legislative legal issue that we would have mandatory continuation for architects to be able to protect the architect's ability to provide those services. So this was not a choice. It's not muddled up with anything else. This is for architectural licensing in California. Now, the other continuing education for AIA membership, and remember that AIA is a professional society. It doesn't license. It's a professional society. So there are other requirements for continuing education to be a member of AIA. And then once again, if you're licensed in other states, there are other different scenarios of mandatory continuing education in order to be able to sustain your license, let's say in New York. So this is just specific to California licensure. There's nothing else muddling the waters. It was a legal outcome. We can't touch it. And so this additional 5 hours is by choice, and with the caveat that we also have the freedom to continue to discuss anything beyond that. So if any of you are a little unclear, I'm hoping that clarifies the issue. So that's the background of continuing education for licensure in California.
Thank you, Betsy, for your comments. It looks like we have Brett up again. You're on mute, Brett.
We've been talking earlier in the year with NCARB about more diversity, and so I have a question and then a comment after somebody answers. Do we have bias in the profession as part of the continuing education requirements currently? And if after that I could comment on the answer.
Brett, I'll take a stab at this. If you mean by bias, one of the early findings of this committee was that the ADA and the magnitude of revisions to California accessibility laws and regulations do not warrant repeated study and testing of knowledge every 2 years, and that the current licensure renewal continuing education requirements are too narrow in content to keep pace with evolving contemporary practice.
So I don't quite understand the response. It sounds like the answer is no. Well, in the legal profession, we have to do continuing education requirements, and 3 of the hours are biased in the profession, whether the profession and our organizations are committed to diversity, whether there's bias in the way we promote and deal with our clients, in terms of minority and disabled, but particularly with minority communities. And I'm just wondering if there is currently such a thing in the continuing education requirements. It sounds like Pasquale, from reading what he read, indicates that we're open to such a thing and it doesn't exist today. But could you clarify that?
Currently, and I'll ask Laura to jump in or Marcus to jump in, our continuing education requirements in the state of California are narrowed to 5 hours of education and accessibility.
Okay. And that's it.
My understanding, Betsy, do you agree?
Yes, I was just going to comment that even within AIA requirements, there's nothing that is specifically related to anything other than health, safety, and welfare units, which can be interpreted in any number of ways. Now, I'm part of a large firm, and because of the size of the firm, we are required to be trained in terms of equality and diversity within the workplace. And that is true, I think, if you're a firm of 50 or over, something like that. So from a practice perspective, that is regulated in ways other than through our professional society or through our licensure.
So with regards to the mission of the California Architects Board, Brett, the mission and the boundaries of the Architects Board is to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public. Mm-hmm. And we were cautioned early on when the conversations were around creating more aspirational continuing education requirements, that we need to be careful about that, because that's not the mission of the board.
Thank you for clarification. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Okay, I don't see any other hands at this point, so I'm going to put something in front of the committee as you all consider what the motion may be back to the board on this, let's call it very well-vetted conversation that we've had with regards to the AIA proposal. And what I'd want to put on the table for the committee to think about as you formulate your motion is that the strategic plan initiative charged to the PQ committee was to assess and amend a current law to be responsive to more contemporary and evolving practice. So this committee has an opportunity to revitalize rather than simply add on to the requirements associated with continuing education. And if we add 5 more hours, have we circumvented that opportunity? And now we have 10 hours of very prescriptive type of continuing education. So that I just wanted to say that. And maybe kind of sort of, based on what I've heard in the conversations today, is that the entire committee is wholeheartedly in support and on the importance level of the proposal from AIA, that everyone is open on both sides of the fence to working together to bring the initiative forward for legislative sponsorship. So maybe kind of sort of a motion back to the board from this committee could be for the board to endorse the Climate Action Zero Net Carbon Design Learning Program as a part of a revitalized continuing education subject matter topic, and invite the AIACC to participate with the CAB in assembling empirical evidence and information to inform the basis of the licensure renewal continuing education amendments. I will leave that on the table, and if anyone wants to start shaping or forming a motion, I think we can move the conversation forward and put us where we need to be.
That's well put. This is Betsy. I'd like to support that motion. If you're making a motion, I'll second it. If you'd like to make a motion, I'll make it.
I don't believe I can make a motion.
Okay, I will make that motion. And I would assume that the way you worded it is in clear support of this 5 hours dedicated to that subject, with the opportunity to discuss a greater comprehensive continuing education future in California.
As a matter of clarification,
I'm going to need you to restate the motion. I'm not clear on what it is.
Okay, as a matter of clarification, it endorses the concept but doesn't approve an additional 5 hours, because I believe that will circumvent the committee's work. But let me restate the suggested motion for the committee to consider, and that would be that the board endorse the AIACC Climate Action Zero Net Carbon Design Learning Program as part of a revitalized continuing education subject matter topic, and invite the AIA to participate with the CAB in assembling empirical evidence and information to inform the basis of continuing education amendments.
My only question there, Pascal, is I don't want this 5 hours to get buried in a bigger program because it will sink it time-wise. So that would be my only question. I would like to reword it such that this 5 hours is approved and moves forward as we with AI California Council look at an expanded program and get this piece in the queue. So that's my response.
The only short response I have to that, Betsy, and the committee, is that if we endorse 5 additional hours in this subject topic or subject matter topic, we then are spending the amount of continuing education units that we're going to eventually evolve to recommending to the board.
Can I jump in, Pascal? I have my hand raised, but I can wait.
No, yeah, I think you're the only hand up. Go ahead, Dion.
Okay. So, Betsy, you two are very close. What I was thinking when I listened carefully, both of you, I think the full board will be very well served if we have a motion very similar to what Pascal has suggested. And the board will be also very nicely served if the voice like you at the full board and argue for why put a nail on that particular wording, net zero design, is so important in the full board's motion. I think let the full board make that decision in the specific language, perhaps can serve better in terms of this committee, because this committee is designed to support the full board make informed decision.
Thank you, Tian. The hands went up pretty quickly, so I don't know if it was Kirk or Stephanie first, so I'm going to go to Kirk first and then Stephanie.
I'd just like to second Betsy's motion, however it's friendly amended, and I can, Pasquale, I can appreciate why you're not wanting that 5 hours in there, but it could be put in as not definitive, but it's something that we would give consideration to at the request of AICC, something to that effect. So it's not definitive, but it's out there, and people can look at that, and at least sets a framework.
Thank you, Kirk. And then we have Stephanie.
I think the assumption that a more comprehensive program is going to bog down this 5 hours maybe is not correct, because could you look at it the other way, and that someone looking at this proposal, say an architect who we're trying to get support from, could look at this proposal, or even a legislator, and say, why did you pick this one thing, right? Just like when we had accessibility, it was, why did you pick this one thing? It's like, well, this is the biggest fire right now. Obviously, like, it's literally a fire. We know that this is a huge issue, but will we get resistance because it's not comprehensive?
No.
You don't think so? It's just food for thought.
Okay. I'm going to let Mark interject before we go to Brett.
Pasquale, thank you. Stephanie, in response to the point you just raised, we had legislation back in when Arnold Schwarzenegger was governor that would have given the California Architects Board the authority to implement a comprehensive continuing education program if it found the need. And Governor Schwarzenegger vetoed that. We did not try again with Governor Brown because he was just philosophically opposed to mandatory continuing education, so there was no reason to try. You could say that not that we are opposed several of my boards of directors over the years have voted to support comprehensive continuing education. It's not that we're opposed to that. We do not, at this point, we don't want to jeopardize what we think to be an emergency situation, climate action, to pursue the larger objective. During the year in 2021, if we move forward with this and there's legislation and work with the governor's office, there's support for something greater than that, and the board supports something greater than that, then definitely let's have that conversation. But right now, it is our judgment that that could jeopardize the 5 hours in zero carbon design, given our past experience. If that makes sense. Yes.
Great. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark. Stephanie, is that a second hand or is that a carryover?
I will put my hand down. Thank you.
Okay. And Tion, is that a second hand or is that a carryover? Okay, so then let's go to Brett. And then Steve Sands. You're on mute, Brett.
Okay.
You're good.
Okay, yes. I agree with Stephanie. And I have a question for Tien. Tien, when you take into account Pasquale's motion before it was commented on, just as pure motion, do you feel that that motion was consistent with my last comments?
If the motion does not exclude your last comment. So if we take that motion, there's no specific limit in terms of mandatory continuing education to be enhanced in which way.
So I understand that to be yes. It sounds like the motion by Pasquale is consistent with my comments about looking at a comprehensive look at whether there's requirements that are old and need to be taken out, new ones put in besides zero net energy. And so thank you.
Okay, thank you, Brett. So then we have Steve Sands next. And I think, Stephanie, that is a second hand, correct?
Yeah, Laura, this is to you. They're making a motion based on an agenda item in the committee packet. And in my reading, the motion has to be narrowed to what the agenda item covers. Is that correct?
I think the motion's okay. We do have perhaps some legal counsel that might be able to weigh in, but there's not going to be any other substance to give to the board because the committee doesn't have anything beyond the AIA proposal. So I guess I'm a little unclear from that perspective as to what TQ is really recommending to the board. What is it the board's supposed to consider? There's nothing beyond the AIA proposal.
Which is the five hours, not 12 or 15 or anything else. I also point out that the board can do anything it wants at its next board meeting. So if the committee makes a recommendation, the board can change the agenda in any way it wants and include whatever it wants. So I wouldn't get too hung up on the actual wording of the motion. Just make sure it's legal. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. So it looks like I have a second hand by Stephanie.
Yeah, I just want to say, I think, Mark, your comments, especially reiterating the emergency part of this, has changed my opinion a little bit. But I do think we are right now disrupting some progress we were making as a committee and with the board to suggest a comprehensive program. So I just want to make sure that we find a way to not lose sight of that, because I think that is our end goal. So if we do admit that in this emergency we're going to prioritize this, I just want to make sure we don't stop there.
Thank you, Stephanie. Kirk.
Stephanie, your point's well made, and excuse me for all these analogies, but the comprehensive continuing education is working on a master plan. So we've been working on this master plan. We have a series of buildings in that master plan. All of a sudden, this hot client has come along. He says, I want this building now. And so you sort of set the master plan aside a bit and you start working on that one building. And that's the emergency that Mark is talking about. So it's consistent. It's consistent with our overall goal. It's just we need to take a pause to address this emergency first of all. That's not to say we're not going to continue and kick our eye off the ball for the entire master plan.
Kirk, since I just to follow the analogy again, that our clients are consumers of state of California.
Well, I think it's not just state of California. You know, as Bill said earlier, and we've seen with this committee, what we do, everybody else looks at. And that's part of the emergency, right? Is if nobody else is doing anything about it, hopefully they'll follow our lead.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. So, any other questions, Stephanie? I still see your hand up. Nope. Okay, good. All right, so let's get back to Betsy and her motion. Betsy, you want to rephrase your motion?
Well, those of you who know me know that I hate wordsmithing. So I really hope that we don't get buried in that. But I would like to support the AI California presentation regarding a continuing education requirement on climate action and decarbonization as presented by Bill Leddy, suggesting 5 hours of mandatory continuation with the recognition that this will be one of a part of a greater approach to additional continuing education opportunities for licensure within the state of California. How about that? Something along those lines.
Thank you, Betsy. Did you capture that, staff?
Marcus, did you get that? I did not write it down.
But you have it on recording, right?
Aren't we recording this meeting?
We're recording it. Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, so I think the motion's been noted. And I think Kirk, were you about to second the motion, Kirk?
Yes, please.
Okay, so we have a second from Kirk. All right, so before we take action on the motion, is there any public comment?
This is the moderator. I will go ahead and at the request of the committee chair, I will open up the Q&A panel. If any members of the public would like to make a comment, please type, I would like to make a comment, and submit it to all panelists using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. If you are not seeing the Q&A panel, go ahead and click on the question mark within a box in the bottom middle of your screen. We'll give you a moment to access this feature. This is the moderator, and at this time I see no request for public comment. Would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Please do.
All right, I'll do that. It's closed.
Very good. It looks like a hand went up just before the roll call vote. Brett, do you have a closing comment? You're on mute, Brett, if you do have a comment.
Yep. Would you be kind enough to read the motion back slowly before we vote?
I don't know that we can do that because it's on, staff is depending on the recording of Betsy's motion, but maybe Betsy, you can paraphrase what your motion was?
Well, Brett, I will do my best. The motion would be to support the recommendation from AIA California as delivered by Bill Leddy regarding the requirements for carbon neutral continued education for licensure in California at 5 hours as recommended, with the understanding that this will be one of a number of other opportunities that will be examined under consideration for continued education as a mandatory requirement for licensure in California, something to that effect. So leaves a window open for an unprescribed additional number of hours while still allowing this particular emergency, in my opinion, emergency recommendation to move forward. And just to clarify, Brett, so you're aware, those existing 5 hours of ADA compliance, they're not old. It's all we have. So there's nothing old to retire, and it is a legal requirement. That was a deal that was cut with the legislature. So it will stand for the foreseeable future until any legal opinions change regarding that. That was a negotiated, that was actually a negotiation that was suggested by this committee and was adopted by the board and the legislature.
Thank you, Betsy. And again, Brett, that was a paraphrase of the actual motion that staff has recorded and will put together and deliver to the board. Keon, you have a hand up before the roll call vote, or can I
yes,
call upon you now to call a vote?
Okay, I just wondering, the two, Betsy, your two motions slightly deviate for my memory. The second one, the recent one you read, is only specific said for the future or overall, how do you word it, adding one or more units or something. I think that will.
No, I didn't say one or more units. I said this would be the first in what is anticipated to be a larger consideration of other future contingencies. And I didn't prescribe a number or a subject.
Okay.
I think Keon, Betsy's motion is somewhat general and open door for further development. Okay, very good. So Keon, please call the vote.
Okay. Pascal Gutierrez.
Yes.
Tian Ping, yes. Raymond Chen.
Yes.
Betsy Doherty.
Yes.
Lang Gall.
You're on mute, Clem.
Yes.
Brett Gladstone.
Yes.
Kirk Miller.
Yes.
Stephen Sands.
Yes.
Stephanie Silkwood.
Yes.
Sunny Wood.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chair. Well, it is 4:28, and I believe we've taken care of all our business that was agendized. And so I'd like to close the meeting at this point, but I want to thank you all for participating on the committee and working over the last 2 years to get to where we're at. The recommendations that have been voted upon will be forwarded to the board for their December meeting. And the PQ meeting, I presume, is pretty safe to say, will not meet again until sometime in 2021. So with that, I wish you all a happy Halloween.
Pascal, could I interrupt really quick? I'm sorry. Can we just see if we have any additional public comment from anyone in the audience?
After the vote?
Yeah, just for any items that were not on the agenda. I don't think we asked for it at the beginning.
Moderator, we did ask for public comment before the vote.
No, I mean at the beginning of the agenda for just open public comment.
Oh, okay, very well.
All right, this is the moderator. I will go ahead and open up the Q&A panel. And if anyone has comments on items not on the agenda, you can type out a comment and submit it to all panelists using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. We'll give you a moment to reference this feature. All right, we do have an individual by the name of Nora that would like to make a comment. So Nora, I will let you know when you've been unmuted. And Nora, you've been unmuted.
Hi, everybody. This is Nora Clabo. I am a former AIA California board member and am very much in support of this continuing education effort. So I just want to encourage you to follow up on this as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Laura. Nora, I'm sorry.
All right, this is the moderator, and that was the end of requests for public comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
All right, it's been closed.
Okay, very good. So it is now 4:30, committee. And as we continue to close, I will resume by wishing you again all a happy Halloween. Hope you get the opportunity to get out and vote. It's kind of an important deal. And I wish you all a warm and peaceful holiday season, but most of all, stay safe. Thank you for being here today.
Stay safe and stay well, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe.
Take care.
Thank you
Bye.
all.
Great
Take care.
seeing you all.